We have a quorum. The first item on the agenda tonight is special exception application for 66 River Road proposed farm under section 27.1.44C, Jeffrey and Patricia Cashman. This is a continued public hearing. We've had a lot of testimony with it already. So the main thing we expect tonight is to get some new information from the applicant. And then as far as comments from the public, again, I want to note that any comments should be new information, not restating things that you've already told us, just to be clear. Is there any correspondence that we have to read that's new? No new correspondence? Okay. In that case, is there an agent or applicant who would like to speak to us?
Sure. Good evening, Ed Casella, representing Jeffrey and Patricia Cashman, who are here this evening as well. And they've also hired Mike Ott, who's a professional engineer, to assist in the review of this application and the presentation of it to you. And one of the things that we have tonight as well is an updated survey, partial update of the survey of the northern portion of the site related to the mulch area, to hopefully demonstrate compliance with the zoning regulations. So I have a number of copies of these to hand out for you. So this, together with our previous plan, which is already in the record and details a lot of the activity, particularly on the lower portion of the site, the farm corrals, etc., can serve as the accumulated site plan. We also have a topography that Art Barton had on file, just showing the general topographic nature of the property. It's very apparent when you're on the site, but topography was available, so we figured we would submit it to the record. Sorry. Okay. And Mike, as I said, has agreed to fill in the details to the extent that are necessary with a full site plan. And thus far, since getting the survey, this is what he's been able to accomplish. I don't know if I have enough of these, so I'll make sure I give them to the members who are seated. Thank you. So we really have three operating documents at this point in time. The original site plan, which was submitted, that includes a lot of information on it. And then we knew there's a lot of questions, in particular about the location of the upper area. So that was surveyed as it exists today by Art Barton. What you have, and I think you can actually see if you compare the two documents, that it's fairly similar to what was presented previously. The concerns, I know, were with respect to the nature and scope of the setbacks. From the mulch operation, there's a required 35-foot setback and 25-foot vegetative area. And the 35-foot setback is met on both sides. There's a small area where the edge of road encroaches to within the 25 feet, which we called out on our original site plan as well. That will need to be re-landscaped to comply with the zoning regulation. So that's on all of the plans. The total acreage of the mulch production area as surveyed is 11,975 square feet, which is less than the 15,000 square feet required under the zoning regulations. We had a base of 11,625 square feet, so it was slightly off, but now we have a defined number and a defined plan of the mulch production area. as completed recently by Mr. Varden. We know there was lots of questions as well about stormwater and how the site handles stormwater. In fact, you received correspondence from the neighboring property owner, Veronic Lopez. If you have that letter, I don't recall whether that email or letter was read into the record at the last hearing. But she talks about how the flow, it's an email dated November 5th, it looks like. And she actually says, if Mr. Downs would have followed the flow of water as he indicated he did, he would have seen that it was then flowing directly into the corral, down the length of the corral toward my property in my front yard. The only thing that stopped it from entering my property is the mulch that Mr. Cashman spread a few years back to stop this from happening. Before this, and for many years, water flowed directly into my property. So if you recall, what we had talked about was the water comes down off of the hill. This is the Lopez property, but then it remains on the Cashman property and does not go onto the Lopez property, where it's then allowed to disperse into the grassy corral areas that are on that side of the property. This was confirmed by Mr. Downs when he was on the site, and I'm sure you'll have confirmation from Mike Ott as well. And we have, from a stormwater perspective, again, whether there's any detrimental impact on the adjacent property owners, Ms. Lopez admits that Cashman has taken steps to ensure that this operation does not impact her from a stormwater perspective. So those are, I know that some of the large outstanding questions that are out there. What I think makes sense now is if we could just hear from Mike Ott, who's been on the property, been on the site during several of these large rain events that we've had. Before I get to that, I know there was an outstanding question about the first grind. And I haven't decided in my mind if it's been answered yet, so I wanted to be able to address it. I know Commissioner Singh had questions as to what represents first grinds that we're suggesting is what is occurring on this property pursuant to the correspondence that we've had with DEEP. So first grinds are when it's already been ground, they bring it on the property, and that's what's allowed to come into mulch. So the tree companies who we heard from go out and they use their chippers to create first grind, and that's what's coming on the property to be, further created into mulch. And Jeff can obviously answer any questions. But I was just looking back at some of the previous answers to the question. I wasn't sure if it had been answered, so I wanted to bring up that additional information. So Mike, do you want to come up and?
Sure. Good evening. For your record, I'm Mike Ott. I'm a licensed professional engineer and land surveyor with Summer Hill Civil Engineers in Madison. I was asked to look at, to walk the site and observe the stormwater patterns, stormwater runoff patterns. So there's no, as you probably know if you've been on the site, there's no formal outlet for stormwater. There's no defined channels. There's no pipe outlets. Stormwater runoff comes from, if you look at this town topography, little 8.5 by 11 from Mark Varden. The topography is such that the land slopes from the north to the south towards River Road. There's a very much a constant slope to River Road. It's steep in the rear in the northern portion, but the topography flattens out where the house and several of the main buildings are on the site. So there's no, it's a diffuse stormwater runoff pattern. There's no defined outlets. There's no channelized flow. There's no piped flow. Stormwater makes its way, any stormwater runoff that leaves the property would make its way out to River Road and head to the west to a pair of catch basins that are further down to the west. The stormwater runoff specific, so it's diffuse, it's spread out throughout the site, but the stormwater, as Attorney Casella said, the stormwater runoff that comes off the mulch operation, which I gather is what you're really concerned about, is directed towards the corral area. These are penned, I guess it would be the front eastern corner of the site. If that makes sense, yeah, the front eastern corner. And that is where, just as Attorney Casella said, where the topography, there's a lot of micro topography. The ground is like up and down like this. And stormwater, it's not a graded, uniform slope out to river roads. So there's opportunity for stormwater runoff to travel through that corral area and sit and infiltrate into the ground. I saw no evidence of flow on either adjoining property to the east or the west, stormwater runoff. And I think that's about all I can tell you about the stormwater runoff patterns there, because I think I'm trying to answer any questions.
I know this probably isn't your expertise, but what are the soils there? You know?
I don't know. I don't know whether they're, it's close to the river, so they might be outwash soils, sands and gravels, but maybe not. In Clinton, it could be glacial too. But I do not know.
Thank you. Any further questions from the commission?
I have a question. So what was the scope of Mr. Ott's input on this map as far as engineering wise? It was just an update or just a certain piece that was looked at?
Regarding the map, what I did is I gathered you wanted a compilation plan. You wanted the information from Art Barton's different surveys pulled together, and that's all I did. I've done no survey work. I just produced what we call a compilation plan and just pulled together the existing features that Mr. Barton has had on his 1987, I think, survey and his most recent survey of a couple of months ago.
Okay.
And I should also, I'm sorry, I should also say that maybe I did say this, but regarding stormwater runoff, I walked the site during and after three times, several significant floods. So,
Just a question as to the function of the 2-foot wide concrete block wall.
I don't know. It's probably just a little retaining wall, but I think, could you answer that, Jeff?
It actually provides a landmark up on top of the hill for trucks to be able to dump off of. It's about 6 feet tall on the opposite side of it, and trucks can dump. And it gives them availability to dump many loads during the course of the day. And what I do is I take a payloader and push it off at nighttime, usually on a daily kind of a basis, maintaining what's up on that wall. It also gives us opportunities on that block wall to actually be able to load a larger truck with a smaller payloader, that they can get up next to that wall, and we can take a smaller machine and load a larger truck up on top of it.
And the block wall, just if I can supplement that answer, is on the north west portion of the mulch production area. It also serves as a defined northwestern extent of the mulch production area, surveyed into this plan. And part of the reason of that is there's a couple limitations. First of all, you folks have a limitation, but the DEP also has a limitation on how much can be processed on one property. So the Cashmans need to ensure that they don't go over either of those, and this mulch wall keeps it defined on the northwestern portion.
Can I ask one more question? So as far as the setbacks defined here, the 35 feet, is that, earlier it was penciled, so now it's drawn, so is that something that Mr. Otts did?
Art Barton, I'm sure you know, a licensed land surveyor,
Yeah.
prepared that survey. So he feel located what's shown on there and the relationship to the property lines and the setback.
Okay, thank you.
Art does everything hand drawn. So this is what we get.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hold on, Jeff.
We prepared this board for a lot of reasons tonight for the commission. We realize it's really hard for the commission to be out during all the events in the storms and all the other stuff. some of the comments that have come to us was folks wanted to know what was going in the catch basins out on River Road. First off, I want to make a statement that the 2 catch basins that were put out on River Road, there's rarely any catch basins on River Road because of the age of the road. The engineering on the road has been very minimal because it's an old historic road. And those 2 catch basins that were put in there was, back when we first moved in, we had a real severe problem with the water that was in the basement of the home. And we had some pumps that were running down the driveway, sometimes for up to 2 months. And in the wintertime, it created a mass icing storm that was out on River Road, and that straightaway of River Road. And Ed Villette, the town engineer, and I met one day because we actually had some vehicles that were coming from the campgrounds that were landed on our front of our property. And we determined that 2 catch basins needed to be put in. And what we did on our house at that time was we took the catch basin and we utilized that through a drain from our sump pump in the house. And what we did was we worked together with the town in order to keep an icing condition. In the straightaway of River Road, there's a lot of shading there, and that ice was getting to be really, really horrific. But we needed to maintain the furnace and all the other problems that were in the house also too. So we worked with the highway department and we put a drain, 2 sump pumps into the house because there was such mass water that was coming into the home that we did absolutely nothing about. So at that point, we cured the water coming down the driveway, coming out of the windows, but at that point, we still had a problem with water in the basement. So on top of the hill, we got a little creative with some excavation and stuff like that there. And we've utilized the water down the driveway during the summertime to keep the trucks and the dust and the stuff like that down there. And we can manipulate the water by just a small grade change during the summertime. And we haven't had anybody complain about dust because that's what we're actually capable of doing. In the wintertime, that creates a massive problem for us because that wintertime turns into nothing but ice throughout our whole place of business. So in the wintertime, we like to try and divert the water on a seasonal basis around the backside of the barn, which now keeps it absolutely pure and safe inside of our barn areas. We've had water inside the barns on some of the mass rains. Some of the pictures that are here tonight that show, since you've asked this question, we've had massive, unseasonable, unquestionable amount of rain that just doesn't seem like it wants to stop. One of the worst things from a farm aspect is rains and mud. It's just horrific. It just makes everything, just destroys everything. And with the idea of taking the water around the backside of the barns and to go through the front fields, there's a sediment of a lot of different fingers that actually took that sediment. And I'm sure Gary can understand that in the massive rains, the wood chips, the wood, it floats. It's almost impossible to try and control any kind of a small wood chip anywhere. But what we've done is we've tried to get the massive amounts of water to be able to be stopped in that one area so that we can maintain it and we can clean it and go from there. It's been kind of a really horrific issue. There's photographs here today from Fox Hill. There's Jamaica Road. We have a map if you'd like to come up and look at it. And there's a piece of property highlighted on this map here is my farm operation here. And up in the very back of it is a huge piece of property, that watershed that comes down. And if you looked at the topography map, there's almost 100 feet of elevation change. And that property belongs to the land trust area. And the water exits, some of it through my property. It exits some through Fox Hill. It exits Jamaica Lane. And the water and the massive amounts of water created what you can see pictures. I mean, even your Morgan School took a huge hit. Huge hit in water. And what Heather has tonight is Heather has videos of the water going into the catch basins from our farm. In the video when we took it, the water is just as clean. I appreciate the idea of how much sedimentation was there. I believe Gary's trying to address the idea of how much tannins, and you can see past the road, you can see how much debris came from the washout that came from up on top of the road. The pictures and the photographs here tonight show, right here, this is 66 River Road, absolutely, including Veronica's property, next door the water comes, and even across the street from Bob and Mary's property, all gathers down into those catch basins, and you can see the water's absolutely nice and clean because of the operation that we do have. Heather, if you'd like to show the commissioner, you'd like to see the live video that we have of the water, you can see the question of tannins is like non-existent at all. So tonight, if we were to look at some of the other opportunities that have required the town municipality having to do massive push-ups of erosion out onto the roads, you can see this is Foxhill before us. You can see some of the massive erosion that's happened. But yet our farm, yes, we do. We had some erosion on the hill. There's no doubt about it. Out behind the barn, we have a low spot that takes a lot of that sedimentation and it dumps it behind the barn so we can take the payload and recycle that material and grade it and push it back up the hill. It's that clean. It hasn't been easy for 30 years out there to be able to maintain a farm, and we do the very best that we can. The berm that was built, and it's been there since day one that we've worked up on top of the hill, has been to try and hide the operation in the residential neighborhood. We've tried to maintain a wonderful aspect of residential and farm out on the property, from doing plantings and flowers and things like that there. There's photographs of trucks through the years. There's pictures of topography maps. There's a lot of information that's on here tonight. I wanted to clarify, there's a document up there today from Barbara Swan, whether it's appropriate or not today, about a nursery and farm operation, of her knowledge of it, and had gone to the commission on the very first complaint back in '87. And the commission was more than aware of an attorney that had written letters to the commission. And Barbara Swan wanted to clarify that, and she came to the commission, and that's where she had clarified to you and to the commission and to the town her knowledge of a farm and nursery operation on that property. That was the intent of why we bought the property. And that was in, when we bought it, August 3rd, 1987. It was what our intent was, to buy that property. The rest of it's there for your approval if you'd like to. I'd like to point out one particular document here tonight that's dated on 2/29/12 for a permit for the cows that we have on our property that we bought and paid for. It was a measly $15. $15 to a zoning enforcement officer that I didn't realize the zoning change came around. And your effective date was January 1st. We were non-conforming to the zoning regulations. The order to discontinue didn't come out until 4/16/2012. We were non-conforming to the zoning regulations at that time. And this permit, I don't even know why we would charge it. We were doing everything we could to work with land use to try and be compliant from day one. I want that really understood tonight. We have spent the last, since January 1st, 2012, trying to be compliant.
Now, one thing we will need is all of these documents organized so that we can get them into the record.
Absolutely right. Yep.
And Mr. Chairman, if I could, you should also get a flash drive of some sort of the, Mr. Cashman's daughter just showed a video to the members of the
Thank you.
commission. A copy of that should be submitted also.
I'd like to address, seeing how Mr. Slater spoke, I'd like to address a comment that Mr. Slater spoke to about here in the commission. He had said, stated that the zoning regulations he had found, those zoning regulations in which we own, that farms were exempt from the zoning regulations to the town of Clinton. He found it within a matter of minutes here one night. And when he made that statement to you, he had to write another letter to you afterwards to say that he made a mistake. That in that letter to the commission, he made a full statement to say that those zoning regulations he had made an error. It took less than 5 minutes for your own attorney to find what we had actually owned. 5 minutes. But yet we've been in a legal battle since January. That's all I wanted to say.
Do you have any other?
Yes. Patty Cashman would like to address the commission.
Hi. So I'm just going to read this because it'll be easier for me to stay on track if I do. So to the Planning and Zoning Commission, and I will submit this for your records. My name is Patty Cashman. I have lived at 66 River Road in Clinton for 31 years, and I still reside there. I am one of the applicants, along with my husband Jeff, requesting that our property remain a farm status. I have been quiet through these proceedings because my husband and I are on the same page as far as our desire to have this application go through. And at this time, however, I feel the need to speak up and correct some of the blatant untruths with regards to the letter that was dated October 1st, 2018, and submitted to this board by my neighbor Veronica Lopez. Ronnie and I became good friends and neighbors after she moved into the house next door. We helped each other out. We have helped each other's families out as good neighbors do, and we were good friends for 25 years. I'm not sure what or why things changed as drastically as they did a few years ago, but they did, and here we are. I understand that as a board, you are charged with a fact-finding mission here. So I would like to alert you to some of the facts that have been misconstrued in that letter. So in response to some of her statements, I would say the following. The first thing is that she writes that there was no farm there when my husband and I bought this property in 1989, and by his own account, meaning my husband, he was awarded farm status in 1990, a year after we moved in. So if you take time to look at this a little later tonight, this letter that Jeff referenced this morning is from Barbara Swan. It was, let's see. This was in regards to the fact that when we bought the property, we approached Barbara Swan prior to that and let her know that our intent in buying the property was that we would utilize it for our income through farming. So the letter is to the Planning and Zoning Commission at the time. It was from Barbara Swan, and it's dated July 6th of 1988. She considered our property at that time to be considered nursery and farm according to zoning. When Ronnie references that he, meaning Jeff, was awarded farm status in 1990, a year after we moved in, she's actually referring to the farm tax status of the property, which began on October of 1990. That's this record here. It's dated October of 1990. This is our farm tax status. This is our zoning status. They are two different things. The zoning status is dated 1988, which is prior to her moving in. We had farm status at that time, according to Barbara Swan. This is regarding the tax. It's two totally different things that Ronnie has lumped together in her thought process, and I don't think she understands that the actual farm status was in effect prior to her moving in next door. So I wanted to make that clear. She also stated that in her letter that we had 3.5 acres of land. She stated, quote, that Mr. Cashman has 3.5 acres of land, but he wants you to believe he farms 300 acres. We have never, ever given the indication that we have 300 acres. We have 3.44 acres, which is over the 3 acres necessary to keep farm animals. She also stated, and I'm quoting here, he does not plant, grow, or harvest any crops. What does he take to market? Some chickens, eggs. This is not farming. We do sell chickens and eggs, as well as hay and mulch, and the sale of these items, according to your town Clinton town regulations, is consistent with a farm. Over the years, we've also had greenhouses and have planted and grown and sold our own inventory from our own property, as well as from our truck gardens at local markets. So if you look up here, these two photographs here were taken in the mid-90s. This is our truck garden that we took to the farmer market. I did this myself. I got up every morning, Saturday morning, 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and I loaded up the trucks with Jeff, and I went and spent all day at the market selling the plants that we grew ourselves. Tomato plants, geraniums, marigolds. We did all this ourselves. We did it on our property, and it's not on the board, but I'm going to give it to you. This is also a picture of our property with the greenhouses and all of our inventory taken from our book. And I'll add that to the information that I'm going to give to you. Okay. This is also mid-90s. So my point being that we have grown and sold inventory from our property that we have done ourselves. Another statement that she made was that mulching is not a natural part of his farming. He must truck in the wood chips, grind them 2 or more times, and dye them. The first thing I noticed when I read this and I heard her say it and I read it again, was that she is speaking about the property with regard to the farming that occurs there. So she's acknowledging the farming on our property over the years. Secondly, with regards to the mulch operation on our property, she is greatly misinformed. While it's true that we receive wood chips from the local tree companies, it is also true that this practice has been approved in his email of June 21st, 2012 by Mr. Frank Gagliardo. That's the email that Attorney Casella referenced, and I do have it attached to this letter for you. Mr. Gagliardo is the supervising environmental analyst with the Waste and Engineering Division of the Department of Environmental Protection. We contacted him, and he stated that in his email, he stated that the term first grinds is, quote, a marketable commodity since it has already received some level of processing, end quote. For example, the wood chipping. So I've also attached that, so you have that. In addition, Ronnie's remark continued to state that we grind them 2 or more times and dye them. This is absolutely not true. We hire a tub grinder to come on the property once per year. That's it. The wood chips are ground 1 time. The process usually takes 2 consecutive days, and then the grinder is moved off the property by the owner. There is no dyes added, none. Our mulch is organic, and we only sell 1 type of mulch. The other businesses, many other businesses sell red or black mulch. In the red or black mulch, your dye is infused to create the color that you prefer. We don't add any dye to our mulch. It's natural, it's organic, therefore the claim that the dye in our mulch is contaminating the water in our area is just false. Again, another thing she mentioned was, and I'm quoting here, after strong winds knocked down a tree in my backyard and a portion of it fell in his backyard, he wanted the PZO to give me a bill for $850 to have it cut up and removed. And also, along with that, she said that we filed a bogus blight complaint against her with the PZO. So, the tree that collapsed from Ronnie's property and fell into our property is true. That's true, that did happen. An explanation of the scenario is this. These photographs right here all depict the tree that came down from Ronnie's yard. So this is Ronnie's backyard. The tree came down, you can see it's uprooted. It came down here across our backyard. It landed on one of our farm tractors. It landed on a 24-foot towable hay conveyor and damaged them beyond repair. Due to the fact at the time that this happened, due to the fact that the contact between Ronnie and Jeff and I was restricted, we reached out to the CEO, Eric Knapp, who was CEO at the time. The tree uprooted and collapsed on our property because it was dead. It had been neglected and as a result caused irreparable damage to our property. Therefore, we filed a blight complaint and asked that the $850 cost of the tree removal from our property alone be paid by Ronnie. We didn't ask for any compensation. Other than that, although the damage, if you look at this, is extensive. The tree right here, it had landed directly on all the gears for the tractor. It was not repairable. Same thing with the conveyor. Okay, that's my rebuttal against the things that just were not true in her letter. So now I wanted to move on and tell you why I believe this application should be approved. I married a man 32 years ago that had a heart for the land. That hasn't changed. And over the years, I grew to have the same respect for it that he has. We've raised our daughter with the same ideals. Many families in town of Clinton are involved in soccer, dance, gymnastics, other interests. These parents give their all to their kids. And they teach them great life lessons such as teamwork, sportsmanship, work ethic, and commitment. We chose farming. We chose animals. We have a right to this choice as much as any other family in Clinton has a right to their choice. We chose to take this love of the land and the animals, and we chose to use it to teach our daughter all the same ideals that every other family is teaching their kids. We also chose to make it our livelihood. As beautiful as these sentiments are, I promised you information that would aid you in your fact-finding mission, not just emotion. So I wanted to do that. The choice that we have made to have this farm in town benefits the town of Clinton. Farming and the lessons learned from it need to be taught to our young people so that agriculture is not eradicated completely. That's what the group of FFA students was trying to make known to you through their statements and emails in the September meeting. My daughter and her friends were here. They've been educated by my husband and myself on the practices of farming at our property on River Road. This education is just as important as the actual raising of beef and chickens. It's just as important as selling of eggs, hay, mulch, and the other farm-related enterprises that we do. The future farmers of America, the young adults that are moving in this direction of agriculture, are actually our future. Yours, mine, and also importantly, it's the future of the town of Clinton. Farming is in your regulations, and it's an action that you as a commission have committed to protect and preserve. Even your town seal shows a plow for farming and agriculture, as well as a fish for aquaculture. So I wanted to thank you for your consideration for our application. Thank you for your service to the town. And that's all I have.
You wanted to give us that, too?
Yeah, I'm going to give you a letter.
Mr. Chairman, Mrs. Cashman has repeatedly used the name Ronnie. Can I ask
That
her to
is
clarify
Veronica.
that Ronnie and Veronica Lopez are the same person?
Yes, Ronnie is the term that I call her. I have called her for 32 years.
Okay, but just clarify.
Yes. Ronnie
and Veronica Lopez are
Ronnie
the
is
same
Veronica
person.
Lopez.
Thank you.
The only other clarification for those, Barbara Swan was the former zoning enforcement officer
Correct.
for the town of Clinton at the time they purchased the property. We'd obviously like to, a chance to address that commission again before the close of the public hearing after we hear from the public, but for now, we're
So with that, I would like to take testimony from the public. Again, I want to ask you to only come up with new information, present new information. If you've already presented, don't come up and repeat what you've said already. We usually would take, or not usually, we're going to take first those people who want to speak in favor of the application and present new information. Presenting new information. Okay. Please come up, and if you would, sign your name and address and state it for the record.
Do we have a signature?
Yeah, there's a sign-up sheet over here. Okay?
Couldn't see because of the sign.
Okay, sign-up sheet's on this side.
Sign up first, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I should point out that this hearing is being recorded as required by state regulations, so please make sure you speak up clearly so that we capture it. Your name and
My name is Rebecca Knowlton. Relatively new to Connecticut, moved here from New Mexico.
Can you give your address, please?
I'm sorry?
Your address, please.
Oh, 237 Chestnut Hill Road. Let me know.
Go ahead.
Okay. I can attest to probably three very specific things that if their farm wasn't there, there would have been, well, if nothing else, children's hearts would have been broken. And maybe you can't put a dollar amount on that, but it is our children, it is our future, which is what you seem to be talking about. They took in and helped through their daughter and through their teaching. Some children, some high schoolers, that in their own diagnosis, which that would be theirs to discuss with you, but they have special needs, and through their program, or through programs that they support and that their farm supports, they were able to get rabbits and train them for a companion. My own children have rabbits, and they were going off to college, and they were told that just simply the age of the rabbit, it's just easier to just put them down. Because they have a farm, they were able to take those rabbits, and they have actually used those rabbits in a number of educational situations, and that's just been in the last 6 months. So it may have just been a rabbit, and to some people, well, just kill a rabbit, no big deal. But the rabbits are still alive. They just were used with over 250 people in the Clinton area. I know that it was a huge blessing. It has blessed my family personally. And to be honest with you, I did 4-H growing up, and it revived a love for such a phenomenal program. So I want to say thank you. And hopefully, knowing that somebody else has been blessed by this process. Thank you.
I believe somebody else had signed up also.
Hi, my name is Catherine Zemechnik. I live on 15 Watchers Road.
I hope I'm not repeating it.
Can you please spell your last name?
Zamecnik.
Thank you.
I'm just speaking of my own experiences, the things that I know and have seen from living in the neighborhood for as many years as I had. I live on 15 Watchers Road. I'm the chair of the Clinton Conservation Commission, and I've served on the Clinton Inland Wetlands Commission, though I'm commenting on my own behalf, not on the commissions, which I've served on for nearly 20 years. I wish to express my support for Cashman and the Spruce Hill Farm. I don't know the Cashmans very well. They did not ask me to write this. This is just my own personal experience, being their neighbors all these years. I truly believe that the Cashman Farm is a very nice property, and it's one of the reasons that I love the neighborhood so much. I can't believe how long this dispute has been going on, and I'm sorry I haven't spoken out sooner, but I'm thankful for the opportunity to do so now. I moved to Clinton 33 years ago, and there was a small farm-like property just around the corner from the road our home is located. They had a few animals and a continuous yard sale. It was one of the things I thought was lovely about the neighborhood. It was a Cashman property. The Cashmans had not lived there yet. It was the previous owners. There's been some inconsistencies among the neighbors as to whether the property had animals. I don't know if there were animals there in the 60s and 70s, but there were a few when I moved there in 1985. Over the years, the Cashmans built the farm up to where it is today. There were a few animals in the beginning when they were setting up, and perhaps only a few, small ones were on the property at that time when the neighbor moved in. And there didn't seem to be a problem until the last several years when the larger animals were brought to the property. But when I moved there, I guess the atmosphere was a lot different because there was a house just a couple of doors down from me on Watchers Road that had goats. They weren't in an enclosure, and they walked up and down the road. We had to stop the car several times to let them cross. That's the atmosphere that was there when I moved to that neighborhood all those years ago. Okay, so whether there were animals on that property or not, or it was a farm before, doesn't really matter. I believe that we have the right to farm law, which allows us to be able to homestead or farm on our properties as long as we're in within the zoning regulations. But the farmer wants to be able to do everything possible and reasonably is respectful for the neighborhood. But it's also every neighbor's responsibility to have reasonable expectations. And, there's been some complaints about the mulching, but when I read the specs or the information from the Department of Agriculture on page 24, in my opinion, the mulching operation seems to be related and fit in with the nursery farm status that it has. So it didn't seem out of place to me. Like many people these days in Cashman, are trying to be productive as possible on their land. With our economic and environmental future, it's becoming more important to preserve the right to farm on our properties. I do a little homesteading myself. I have a greenhouse and a garden and such. Firmly believe in this. I remember those first years when the Cashmans had a small Christmas craft fair out of the barn. And they had hot chocolate and cider and sold some crafts made by the neighbors. They had hay rides for the children. There were a few small animals there. And there was, and up until a few years ago, there was horse boarding right across the road. And the horses would walk right up to the fence, which was all the way up to the edge of the property, right on the road. I would walk my kids back, we would walk up and down the road because the kids would love to go down there and see the horses and feed them apples and carrots, you know, just right there on the road. So just walking distance up the road over the border into Killingworth, there were two other farms, the White's Farm, and across the street from that's a Bit of Blue farm. Bit of Blue is probably only another acre larger than the Cashman farm. It's a full productive farm there. Lots of animals on it, fences right up to the road, right up to the neighbor's property. You can walk by and pet the goats right from River Road. Though Killingworth's a different town, and also there's another alpaca farm even farther up there. Killingworth's another town, but we're right there, walking distance on the border. The neighborhoods blend together. It all is kind of cohesive. That's the atmosphere that's there. I've walked. I've done a lot of walking and riding my bike and such up and down River Road, driving my car. I live right up the corner, at least a few times every day for decades. I personally have never seen a lot of trucks there or trucks blocking the road or people's driveways. I don't really see very many trucks at all. I am surprised to hear that there have been as many as 25 trucks on some days. I think there might have been an occasion when there were several trucks showing up at once. Simple scheduling, placing reasonable limits, should take care of an issue without hardship. You know, those seem to be simple things to correct. In all these years, I have rarely had a Spruce Hill truck pass me or come close to me on the road. I've had many campers do so and have never wanted to close a campground down over it or do a traffic study. As a matter of fact, there were two campgrounds on River Road when I moved there. So along with the Riverdale campground, there was the River Road campground. And there's probably less traffic there now than it was at that time. My home is located up the hill. I don't know if there's a map here. Where?
Very end, way to the left.
Oh, over here, yeah. Yeah, I'm right here. This is all about the same elevation. And so there's a walking trail that goes that I usually walk over there. Let me see. So my home is located uphill and upland behind Cashman Farm. I'm home early every day, all weekend and all summer. I've not heard an excessive amount of noise, nor have I ever experienced any snow coming from the farm when I walk by and pet the animals or whatever, or see any mess or anything. That's my experience. I've also spent much time walking the trails behind the house that leads to the top of Cashman's property. And I've never heard excessive noise or smelled bad odors while up there. I'm up there quite often. That's where I walk my dogs. I mean, several times a week for years. So it's not that I can't hear the sounds of the farm from my home. I can hear them very clearly. There's some truck noise on and off, but it's not regular continuous. Though I do believe that there should be none of that activity on Sundays, early mornings, or in the evenings. I've heard more noise from leaf blowers, lawn mowers, and chainsaws that were way more disturbing than anything that I've heard from Mr. Cashman. One would think that in all the years I've been near this farm, I would have witnessed at some point the issues of concerns, and I just haven't. It's been brought up that there are limits of to the numbers of animals that one can have on their property. Chickens and other small animals don't really fall under the limits, I think, as long as they're in enclosures. The rest of the animals seem to be within the guidelines. They seem to be healthy. They seem to be clean. They seem to be pretty peaceful. I don't, really myself see any problems. I grew up in West Haven, on a block with rows of 3-family houses. My neighbors had chickens and roosters right outside my bedroom window. People did not complain about things like that back then. I had roosters waking me up at 5 o'clock in the morning, 10 feet away from my window. Things have certainly changed a lot since then. So there was one day, I'd like to say, I was out in my yard and I heard a noise, a very strange noise, and I looked up and there was a cow running out of the woods into my yard. And right away, of course, I thought it was Cashman's cow. So when I called down there, it turned out it wasn't theirs, but they called the Weiss farm, and it turned out it was theirs. That's how close the other farms are to our neighborhood. Minutes later, Mr. Weiss came driving up our driveway to come to get his cow. Just then, my husband came home from work. He had no idea what was going on. Got out of his car, found himself getting into a pickup on his way to go find and lasso a cow. A week later, the same cow escaped from Weiss farm again, this time with a goat friend, and they were seen walking up Waters Road. The next day, I found cow and goat footprints in my vegetable garden. What it's like in my neighborhood. It's why I love it there. That kind of thing doesn't disturb me. I'm sorry to hear the neighbors having such a hard time living next to the farm. I'm not denying that it's more intrusive if you live right next door. I'm surprised by her claim, and I feel bad that she's having a hard time selling the property because of it. It certainly wouldn't stop me from buying the property. I would think that there would be plenty of people who would not mind living there. Obviously, plenty of people who wouldn't either, but to be unsellable, I just don't know. I would think, I see the vehicles on his property. They seem to be like they're well, they're neatly kept. Everything seems to be maintained. I thought the law was as long as you were, using them, they were a necessity and they were registered. You can keep whatever vehicles you need on your property. I would just have thought that a couple of sections of stockade fence and a couple of arborvitae would have solved the problem. Would block out some of the view and some of the noise and some of the smells. There's been a concern about tannins leaching from the mulch pile. Maybe so, but we've had hundreds of acres of woodland up on that hillside leaking tannins like all the time. It may be a little bit more concentrated in that area, but the other thing is that we have, I have well water up on my property, but down on River Road there's municipal water, so we don't really rely on the wells down there for like laundry and drinking and such like that, maybe for other things. Where am I? Okay, let me see.
Please make sure you're, try to pick this up and get to the point.
I'm making my points. I'm sorry that it's not,
Well,
I'm
no,
just giving my
you're-
experiences. If you don't want me to continue.
Well, no, I want you to be more direct.
Okay, well, I'm almost done, if that's
Okay.
all right. Okay, thank you. All right, well, then I guess I'll just skip some of this then. I was going to talk about the runoff that somebody had mentioned there was a lot of runoff coming from Mr. Cashman's property. I've seen the runoff coming from the hillside around that valley that comes down over the top of Waters Road and Jamaica Road, and it's washing, that's where it's all coming from. It washes out, it erodes that hillside, it comes down like a waterfall. Lots and lots of sediment on the bottom of those two roads washing off into Hammonasset River, forming a peninsula of sediment there. And I just wanted to also make a comment about the importance of the soil. There's very few farmland soils in Clinton, and Cashman's property happens to be one of them. I just wanted to mention that I think that it is important to probably preserve that because we may need it in the future, because we might need to become more reliant on small farms at some point. I'll end it there. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who is speaking in favor of this application? Okay.
My name is Claudette Talmadge. I live on 69 Long Hill Road. And I was born in this town, and for 70 years I've lived in this town. And I want to start by telling you some of the things I've seen. I've seen 9 bears raised in this town and walked up and down High Street on a dog leash. I've seen buffalo farms and live across the street from the buffalo farm. I've seen mink farms. I went to school with a kid whose parents raised mink. Horse farms, there's a horse farm now across the street from the brand new high school. There's people that raise dogs, goats, sheep, horses, cats, you name it. And some of these people have their livelihoods doing this. And the point I want to make is, here's a guy and his wife that want to have a farm, and they want to raise their daughter, and they want to earn money to stay alive. Well, all these other people have farms. I don't see them here, people arguing against them. And what people have to remember, when you move into a neighborhood in Connecticut, you live in the country. You don't live in the city. You don't live in New Haven. If you want to have chickens, you can have, I don't know, up to 6 chickens on your property. No problem. I had a couple of rabbits and I had some chickens, but something ate the chickens. The rabbits were fine. My parents always had a big garden, and they'd sell some of their produce. They had animals. They had a cow. They had chickens. My mother was a nut for chickens and geese and ducks, you name it. And these things are what you find in the country. So for people to argue against them when they're trying their best to have their farm, and also as far as the wood chipping and stuff goes, when this town has a problem with hurricanes and trees come down, Jeff says, bring them up here. Where else are they going to bring them? You can't leave them in the yard. And he chips them up and takes care of them. I don't think he charges anybody for it. He's just a decent person. And for this town to argue against these people that are doing no harm, I see it's ridiculous. We have taken time and had continuances, and this has been going on for a couple of years now. I think it's a waste of time, a waste of money, and ridiculous to keep it on. So I vote for the Cashmans. I've known Jeff and his family probably over 20 years. We don't go out to dinner. I'm not best buddies with them, but I know they're good-hearted people, and they wouldn't do anything to hurt anybody. And as far as the runoff, if their house and their farm wasn't there, from Fox Hill down, you're going to get rainwater running down. It's uphill. It's got to come down. So if it comes in somebody's yard, we've got neighbors that have a higher house than we do. My garden gets flooded out every year. What can I do? It's nature. So I wish this was over tonight. Thank you.
Is anyone else speaking in favor of this application? In that case, if there's anyone who would like to speak with new information in opposition to this application?
Good evening, Timothy Shields, 20 Water Street, Guilford. I'm here on behalf of Veronica Lopez. I want to start out with a couple of procedural points this evening. Attorney Casella started out the evening running, and I don't blame him. We had a lot of information to present tonight, but I wanted to bring up one issue. We've had several continuances of this hearing, as we know from September till now. Some of the commission members may have been present at 1 or 2 of the hearings, all of the hearings. I'm not sure what the case may be. I haven't been keeping track of everybody, but I would like to point out for tonight's proceedings that anyone that was not here at the October hearing should not be participating and voting in tonight's hearing, unless you have adequately reviewed the record as well as the transcript or the recording from the October hearing.
That's really insulting to the commission, and we all know that material, and it was terribly inappropriate. So, please,
Commissioner?
No, I am sorry, that was inappropriate. Please get to your point.
I am getting to my point. My point is I'm trying to create a record, okay? One of the other things that I would like to do this evening is this night at the September hearing, Commissioner night at the September hearing, made several comments that would indicate that she is predetermined this hearing, the application itself. She was very concerned about the pre-hearings that the commission conducted under a special committee. in terms of reviewing the application. Her comments were to such to the point that one of the commission members had to stop her from testifying because she was predetermining the issue. I think because of that basis, Ms. Knight should recuse herself from tonight's proceedings. I'll allow her a moment to address that if she wishes. In terms of the information presented this evening, we heard a lot of testimony from various people tonight. I'm sure all very heartfelt. Unfortunately, Mr. Chairman, you had said at the very beginning of these proceedings that September, you were trying not to get us down the road of things that happened in the past. And unfortunately, we seem to have gone down that road. I will simply say, in terms of tonight, what we're dealing with here is a special permit application. We're here to address that. We're not here to address the past. A lot of information was given, historical uses of the property, things of that nature, but the simple matter is we're here to address a special permit. The things that happened in the past, and essentially it's an after-the-fact application. In terms of testimony from Mr. Ott, he testified that he simply did a compilation of prior work done by Art Barden, who is a local surveyor. I believe I'm correct on this, and Attorney Casella can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe at the October hearing that we had, it was presented that the revisions to the site plan that were submitted in October were revisions that were done by the applicant. And the revisions as shown on the map were hand-drawn on that map by the applicant, not by Art Barden. So in terms of Mr. Ott's testimony, I think unfortunately he was mistaken because he may not have been involved in the process all the way along. But I think the record does and will reflect the fact that the lines that were drawn on there, the measurements that were drawn on there, were not done by a surveyor. They were done by the applicant. They were hand-drawn. And that was one of the issues that I had raised at the previous hearing, was whether that was truly representative of everything that was on the ground. In terms of the water runoff, we've heard a lot of testimony about that as well. My client took pictures on Sunday of the rainstorm that we had. I'm going to submit these photos into the record. Unfortunately, I don't have enough copies. I only have one set to show everybody. But in terms of the water flow, we have one photo here that shows the water coming down the roadway, and we get towards the barn. I'm not sure if this was the barn. I don't know if the applicant might be able to clarify that for me, what that structure is. I'm not sure which building it is, but it's down below the hill. But in any event, you can see the water pooling up near that, and there's some white foam that's being generated there. Mr. Ott testified about not witnessing any concentrated, and I apologize if I'm not characterizing your testimony correctly, Mr. Ott, about water flow not being concentrated out into the field. Again, these photos were taken on Sunday. This photo clearly shows water coming in concentrated effort out through the corral. And again, we have this white foamy substance that's present in the water. I don't know what that substance is. I'm a fly fisherman. I have seen white foam water, you know, when I've been fishing in the rivers, Hammonasset River, and all up and down the eastern seaboard. So I don't know if that's natural or not natural. Okay. We have another photo here that again shows the fence, and it shows the water coming through with the white foam on it as well. We have another photo here. This is the fence along the property line between my client's property and Mr. Cashman's property. You can see the ponding in this photo, and that ponding extends through and underneath the fence onto my client's property. So there is water that does flow down that hill, just through.
See that picture, please?
It does flow through and onto my client's property. We have another photo here again. This is just a general photo of the corral area, as I'll call it. And this does, to a certain extent, correlate with what Mr. Ott testified about the water dispersing out through the field. But the photos themselves do lend credence to my client's claim that the water does come through and onto her property. In terms of the actions that are going on there, on Friday, Mr. Cashman had a load of wood chips delivered right up along the property line. That's not within this buffer zone in terms of the vegetative buffer, nor is in the buffer zone as required under the regulations. It's right next to the property line. In terms of, yes?
Can you clarify, when you say on Sunday, do you mean yesterday, December 2nd, 2018?
Yes.
And when you say on Friday, do you mean November 30th, 2018?
Yes.
Thank you.
You guys to look at those. And again, I apologize for not having more copies for everybody, but I was just presented with those this evening. In terms of the water, I'm a little bit confused in terms of the runoff. Mr. Cashman testified about how they maintain the water and how they clean it. If there's nothing in the water that is harmful to the environment, then I question what the need is to clean it, as he testified. In terms of some of the other matters that have been raised this evening, again, as I said, a lot of this comes from the past. My client may have admittedly been confused about different things that were issued by the town in the past in terms of classification as tax classifications in terms of farmland and things of that nature. But be that as it may, we're still here tonight dealing with this permit application. Again, this is an after-the-fact application. We've heard testimony about people at the Department of Agriculture issuing rulings. That's nice. The state has their regulations, the town has its regulations, and that's what we have to deal with here tonight. So you need to make a determination as to whether or not the application meets the standards for your special permit, and whether the other conditions that you have to evaluate have been satisfied, and you vote if you see fit. Thank you. That's all I have.
Okay. Is there anyone else who has any testimony to present tonight? Okay. Seeing none, you wanted to...
Sure. All right, thank you. I just want to, first of all, thank everybody for obviously going through quite a long and lengthy process. Yes, there was probably a lot more history than any of us needed to hear from, but your patience was generous, so we really appreciate that. Obviously, it colors the picture that we think needs to be presented. I have a couple of specific items and then a few general things. First, the hand-drawn updated survey was done by our part and it's stamped by our part, and it's an updated survey plan. So
Say that again, sir.
it's an updated survey plan, the hand-drawn document that was submitted, which shows in particular the upper portion of the property with the mulch operation, and in particular the compliance with the zoning regulations, 35-foot setback, 25-foot vegetative buffer. The lower portion of the property, there's one major issue which was decided at the last time we actually had a substantive hearing, which is that the fence that corrals the animals, i.e. enclosure, needs to be moved 35 feet off the property line. That was your decision. We agreed to that. So any site plan will be modified to address that. It's in Mr. Ott's preliminary plan. So if you do wish to have a compilation of the plans presented as a condition of approval, that's something that we would agree to. I think that's the major outstanding zoning regulatory issue, that the fence off of the eastern property line be moved in 35 feet to meet the zoning regulations that enclose the animals. Animals cannot be kept within 35 feet of the property line. So we understand that determination was made by the commission, and the site plan can be modified to address that. I just wanted to wrap up by talking about the actual special exception criteria that you have so that we can go through it. And I do think, to some extent, and that's why, again, we really appreciate the bit of leash that you've given, but I think the history of this property and of the surrounding properties is relevant when you're considering some of your special exception criteria. For example, number one is the location, type, character of the uses are in harmony and compatible with the neighboring property owners. You have your zoning regulations, which says farms are allowed in the zoning district if you have more than 3 acres. The property has more than 3 acres. And then you have a number of setbacks and things like that, vegetative buffers, animal enclosures. The site plans will meet all of those setbacks. So with that, with the setbacks and the buffers being met, I think you can satisfactorily determine that the character and the types of uses are in harmony and conformity with orderly development of the town. Again, set number 2 is the nature and location of the use, and any building or structure will be adequate for access of emergency vehicles, fire protection. In your regulations concerning mulch operations, there are a number of things that need to be done. We talked about it at one of the hearings, that there needs to be reports from the Department of Agriculture. One of the things is we need a report from the fire marshal that the operation meets the fire marshal standards. So that's part of your regulations as well. It's shown on our plans, the area in particular around the mulch operation. Number 3, and there's been a lot of testimony about this one, streets serving the proposed use are adequate to carry prospective traffic. No provision is made in an unsafe manner that will cause undue traffic congestion. We heard testimony at the first hearing regarding the tree trucks when they line up on River Road. And after that, we actually amended the statement of use on October 1st. The amended statement of use provides there is no staging to be allowed on River Road. Staging will need to take place internally. So that's in our statement of use. That's part of our application. That's what the Cashmans are agreeing to be bound by. The application and the materials submitted provided that there's adequate sight lines. One direction is 550 feet. The other direction is 1,000 feet. More than enough sight line viewing. The lot is of sufficient area and adequate dimension to permit the use, and again, will not be detrimental to the neighbors. Some of these kind of overlap each other. You look at the history of the site, farms across the street, there was animals kept next door, the animals kept up the street, animals kept in Killingworth, down the road, as we've heard about. The property has the minimum number of acres, it has the over 3 acres. The property has the ability to meet the setbacks, and we're agreeing to meet all the setbacks in the vegetative buffers. Number 5, property will be suitably landscaped. One of the questions that has arisen during the course of the public hearing is the nature of the landscape buffer. And formerly acting or currently acting enforcement officer Torrance Downs has been on the property, and he opined, I believe, at one of the hearings concerning the adequacy of the vegetative buffers. One of the commission members brought up compliance with section 26.8. And whether or not, one of the questions I think you're going to have to answer is whether or not 26.8 applies to this property, because this provides a fairly specific direction as to what a landscaping buffer needs to be. My opinion is this 26.8 does not apply to this development. The reason it doesn't apply is because it says this is where business, industrial, and marine zones abut residential zones. The intent of this buffer is to prevent easy access and to diminish as much as possible or eliminate sight, sound, and odors from business, industrial, marine, all capitalized zones in or onto abutting residentially zoned property as viewed from the second floor, etc., etc., etc. It then goes into what everything that needs to be done. Here we have 2 residentially zoned properties that are next to each other. We have uses that are allowed on residentially zoned properties. We are providing vegetative buffers. We've provided them on the plans, but we don't need to meet the specific requirements set forth in section 26.8. The next is provision of your special exception, is that the site plan is in accordance with the plan of conservation and development. You have some in your 2015 update of the plan of conservation and development. There are some pro-farm provisions in there, including support the growth and development of a vibrant agricultural sector in Clinton, consideration of the right to farm ordinance, tax abatement, participation in other farm initiatives. So again, we have an operation here that's been in existence for many years in an area where there's been a number of farms for many years, and we're asking it to continue, and it is consistent with the plan of conservation and development. I think the other two relate to architecture, are not applicable. So again, the bottom line here is, I think if you look at the information that we've submitted, the different plans, you're going to be able to reach the conclusion that this application meets the zoning regulations, with the fence for the animal enclosure being moved in 35 feet, with some additional landscaping being done in the northwest corner of the property. It meets the zoning regulations. From our perspective, we haven't looked at the pictures, but the stormwater, we've spent a lot of time on the property with the stormwater torrents down, visited the property and looked at the stormwater. We hired an engineer to come on the property to look at the stormwater. One of the things that's on the plan is even to increase a little bit of the grading on the bottom of the driveway to even divert more of the property back toward the center, so it disperses a little bit into the corral like we talked about, and some goes back in the center, back into the chicken coop. So yes, we've had a very historic fall of rain. The property owner, next door property owner herself said a lot of the measures that have been taken by the Cashmans have been effective in diverting stormwater. The animals are in compliance. We talked about where the different chicken coops are and where the corrals for the larger animals will meet the regulations. And again, I think the Cashmans still have a lot of work to do. Once this application hopefully is approved, they have to continue to report to the Department of Agriculture, continue to get reports from the fire marshal, the Connecticut River Area Health District. So hopefully you'll agree with us that this application should be approved, that it meets the zoning regulations, that it meets all the standards for special exception. So I don't have anything further. I don't know if Jeff, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I'd like to make just a couple more comments, and then you can do as you wish. I'd like to thank Veronica for taking those pictures, because, with 7 or 8 or 10 inches of water on her driveway, where did you seem to think when it was paved that water went? We have the lower spot on that piece of property, and now we take her driveway, we take her water on our property, and you can obviously see that the water comes from right in the same picture. I hate to say it, but it's a wonderful, nice little jab. And I think it's really sad that we've come down to when we sit there and say, Mr. Cashman added mulch. I added the mulch to the property between us because the water was horrifically, after her paving, was coming onto our property. So I've done everything that I possibly can as a good neighbor through the years. I've tried to be wonderful in many standpoints, and I want to remind the commission that we wouldn't even be here if there wasn't a zoning change. We really wouldn't. And in this farm status that we've had for many years, I have one thought just for each one of you to kind of think about for a second. There's a personal property bill that the town of Clinton gets for each piece of my equipment. How do you think I pay that personal property bill for those taxes? Obviously from running a business. You think they're paid? We shut our business down to be compliant for your zoning regulations. But I'm obligated to pay over $8,000 worth of taxes to the town, which, because we were compliant this year, and saying to you, because of a court order, we shut our business down, you don't have my $8,000. My wife would like to register her car. We don't realize the effects that this has to a community when everybody works together. This is how we've struggled to try and keep everything going. Court orders, please food on our tables, because we're farmers. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It would probably make sense to take a couple photographs of this and submit it as well. I'm sure we don't want to submit this.
I was expecting that you'd disassemble it, frankly, and then just pile up all the papers and just submit it that way.
Okay. Just
If
wanted
you
to
want, it's actually a good idea, Eddie, Attorney Casella, so that you show what it looked like in front of the commission, do both. If we can take a picture and submit that, because you're also going to submit, are you not, and for the record, Ken Slater, town attorney, a flash drive of the video. So if you will provide a picture of the whole, and then if this will stay here tonight, and
Yep.
you know, either tonight or when you can come disassemble it and provide that so they have a record of what was presented tonight.
I would say that if they want to take some time and come up and look at it, you know, it's far away, it's hard to see it from where you are, if I can just step in for a second. But it's interesting to look at, and if you look at it up close, it'll make more sense.
Are there any questions from the commission for the applicant?
I was just gonna ask if Jeff or someone could address the picture of the mulch that appeared to be placed within the setbacks.
Oh, yeah. We've had so much water, we've had an opportunity to receive a truckload of pine or the wood chips. And because the corral is so full of mud and we've moved the animals up closer to the barn, and that even that area is just horrifically full of mud, as soon as we were going to get a chance, maybe tomorrow, we were going to take those wood chips and put them up by the barn so that the cows and the animals would have some dry land to be on. That's exactly what we were trying to do. And that's those two, I guess. It's easy to dump them there because there was a retaining wall there, concrete, and I can scoop them with a payloader and I can dump them over the wall. It takes about 10 minutes.
That's done by Farmville.
And the video, the picture showing the small amount of water on that embankment was I hand dug that small little trench to take the small amount of water that was coming down to keep it off the main part of the road because of icing conditions that we've had just the last few days. So I'm trying to control access up on top of the hill, whether it be even fire access or it be my trucks and equipment. We diverted the water as little as it is close to the embankment, and that's where and I believe that this water is probably going to run for another 30 to 60 days.
So you gave testimony that you shut down your operations, but you've also given testimony that, and pictures that trucks are arriving daily.
We had one truck. We had one truck that just made a delivery a couple days ago because
So it's your
I needed those
testimony
chips.
that in the last year, you have not processed or sold any mulch from your property?
No, we have not.
So where I got really confused tonight about the stormwater. First of all, a very important question hasn't been answered, which was brought up by Veronica's attorney at the last hearing, which was where did those catch basins go? Which I would think would be the most important question that we have. And the reason I'm bringing that up is we also have testimony from Torrance Down in these proceedings that the hill is stable and that nothing leaves the hill. I also have testimony from Mr. Cashman tonight that the wood chips do leave the hill and that sometimes they push them back up the hill.
No, it wasn't wood chips. This is road grindings in the process, Gary. That's what's in the road bed that gets
So
washed.
something's eroding.
The road is. It's not paved.
Tannins contain amino acids, which cannot be seen by the eye, and go into the groundwater. Mr. Cashman tonight, I believe, testified that his sump pumps pumped the groundwater into the storm drains. And that was facilitated because of the water problem on your property you got together with Mr. Collette. So in theory, my concern is that these tannins are running down the hill, being prevented from leaving the property, sitting in a bowl, getting into the groundwater, being pumped out of the groundwater into the catch basin, which nobody has yet testified where the catch basins go, where hawks and bald eagles and fish and everything are right next to the Hammonasset River. I just, during these proceedings, I can't even believe nobody has even brought up that the Hammonasset River is how far from your house?
It's directly across the street.
I would like tonight, before the public hearing ends, maybe we can't get this answered. Where do those catch basins go?
Those catch basins go down across the street to Jamaica Road, They join another catch basin and they go between Mike Simmons' property. There's a natural swale that goes by his home, and the water that is now collected from the actual Rapper's property, the whole neighborhood is pitched that way, including Jamaica Road, comes across the street and goes into those catch basins and goes across the street.
And
Through, I think it's 41 River Road.
and seeps into the groundwater or delivers
No, it
into
goes
the
right
river?
directly through a small swale that the town has an easement on and goes into the river.
Eventually, it all goes to the M&S.
Everything goes to the river. From 5 miles above all the way down. You can see the elevation is up to 100. Up on our property alone, it's 100 feet. And it just keeps going. Jerry, how do you determine the
I'm done.
acidity?
I'm done now.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. In that case, I would entertain a motion to close this public hearing.
A second?
Okay. Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries. Thank you.
This video provided as a public service by Kirk Carr, the Kirkster. Thank you for watching.